Bridget Phillipson, the London MP, Catherine West, says that unless the Cabinet gets itself together and nominates a replacement for the Prime Minister by tomorrow, she's going to trigger a leadership contest. So when are you having the meeting?
Catherine is a great colleague, and I've known her a long time, and I have real respect for Catherine. On this one, I do part company with her. I think she's got this completely wrong. What I do recognise, however, is that Catherine, like lots of other colleagues and like lots of candidates who stood in the elections that we've just had, are really hurting this morning. And I feel that too. You know, Friday morning, I felt absolutely sick to the bottom of my stomach about the scale of the defeat that we'd suffered. And we got a real kicking from the voters. There's no escaping that. And we have to reflect seriously on that. And, you know, we have to reckon with what we need to do as a party now to turn it around. I don't think, however, a leadership contest and all of the problems that would bring is the answer. So I disagree with her, but I do recognise the real hurt that lots of people are facing, good people, and you know, who lost their seats across the country and who had, you know, served their communities, worked incredibly hard, but because of the national picture.
I want to unpack all of that, but let's just deal with what's happening this morning. Are you confident Catherine West won't be able to assemble 80 MPs to trigger a leadership contest? And if she does, what are you going to do about it?
I don't think that will happen, but I think, in a sense, that's almost besides the point, because whilst I disagree with what Catherine is doing, I do understand the worry, the hurt, the pain that people are feeling, and therefore actually turning that around, demonstrating to not just the party, but to the country, that this country is moving in the right direction, that we can have a more hopeful future. That was the message that I heard on the doors in my community and across the country.
But what we're hearing this morning is, and I know we don't want to get too bound up in process, but the truth is, if 80 MPs sign up to her cause, then you are in a leadership contest. Are you sure you can just brush it aside? I mean, this could be chaos.
I'm not brushing it aside, far from it. And whilst I recognise how people feel at the moment, and I share that because we had a really, really difficult set of elections. I mean, that would be to put it mildly. So I'm under no illusions as to the scale of what lies ahead of us.
So what are you saying to your colleagues who will tomorrow morning, by the sound of it, going to be getting a message from her saying, will you put your name on my leadership bid? What's your message to those colleagues?
So what I would say is, you know, I've knocked on doors right across the country and in my own community, as colleagues will have done too, and as party members will have done as well. And what I heard was not a desire for a leadership contest of the Labour Party to spend more time talking amongst ourselves. What I heard loud and clear from voters was their deep sense of frustration that they'd voted for change in 2024. They were hopeful that change would be delivered, and they don't feel that we as a party or we as a Labour government have delivered what they wanted. So I think the last thing that, in response to that, is to say, let's have an extended period of time arguing amongst ourselves. I don't think that would be the right response. And just to give one example, Trevor, of one conversation that really stayed with me, one door I knocked on in my community in Sunderland on Thursday. And the woman I spoke to had been a lifelong Labour voter, so she'd voted Labour in every election, and this was the first election where she was seriously thinking about whether or not to vote Labour. She had lots to say about the last Tory government, a lot of it a bit sweary, and I won't share it this morning.
Yeah, it's breakfast time.
But she recognised the scale of the challenge that we inherited as a government. But she said, look, you've had almost 2 years now. Why does it not feel better? And that's what we've got to address. And her big concern was around social housing and around a family friend who was living in overcrowded accommodation. Now, I could say to her, and I did, we're investing more in social housing, we're going to build more, but people want to see that change more quickly. That's the challenge that we have to rise to. If we then spend months focusing on the Labour Party, not building houses and delivering the change that people did want to see in 2024, I think that would be a huge and profound mistake.
That's really interesting. What did she have to say about Keir Starmer?
Didn't come up.
Seriously? Keir Starmer did not come up on the doorstep with somebody who was engaged?
Genuinely, sincerely, no. Now, I'm not saying that Keir Starmer's leadership did never come up, but actually not as much as people might imagine. What did come up a lot was Policing. GP appointments, why are waiting lists coming down faster? All of the things that really genuinely do matter. And of course leadership matters, but leadership is about a Prime Minister, but it's about all of us as a government, all of us as a party, demonstrating that we are delivering on the change that people voted for.
I want to get on to policy, but I just want to ask you one more thing in this whole area. Do you have a message for those people who are regularly named as potential candidates? Mr Streeting, Ms Rayner, Mr Burnham, what should they be saying today? What do you want them to say?
Look, they don't need a message from me. I think
they do.
They really don't. In 2024...
OK, but you would like... They are in the spotlight. They're in the spotlight. What should they be doing? If you want people not to be doing, what Catherine West is doing, surely the people at the centre of this should have something to say.
So the responsibility that all of us have, whether we are in the Cabinet, whether we are in government or as members of Parliament, is a really big responsibility. Labour governments don't come around very often, and we have an enormous opportunity to turn our country around, to demonstrate the power of government in people's lives at a moment where people are really questioning whether things can get better. I am genuinely hopeful and optimistic about the future of our country. I believe our best days lie ahead of us. It is incumbent on all of us, not just to say that, but to deliver on that promise at a point at which people are really questioning whether politics can deliver. And I think at a point that is really perilous for our country, and at a point where, we're nigh on 2 years into this parliamentary term. We do have another 3 years to deliver the change that people... That doesn't take away from the kicking that we got on Thursday, but we have a unique opportunity. And were it not for the election of a Labour government in 2024, we would not be lifting thousands of children out of poverty in my community and across the country. But clearly the story that we're telling, the message that we're giving, is not cutting through, and it is not persuading people. And that is the challenge that we have to rise to.
Well, maybe one way of beginning to cut through, get people to listen to you again, is to demonstrate that you've understood what they've said. Prime Minister on Friday morning said this, and it was interesting. He said he had made mistakes, he himself.
Yeah.
What was his biggest mistake?
We've had a few. I think the one that I feel caused us real damage early on, I suppose two things, and they are connected. Firstly, the decision we made around the winter fuel allowance, right to target it on those who need it most, but we went too far, and that caused us huge problems. I think alongside that, I think we were too gloomy and too negative early on. People knew the country was in a mess. They didn't need us to remind them in such detail that the country was in a mess. And whilst it's right that we pin all of those problems on 14 years of Tory government, people voted for change for a reason. They didn't want to hear about that. They wanted us to focus on what we as a government were going to deliver. So, and I think those two things are linked. But I do think that those early mistakes embedded a sense of gloom when actually we have a unique opportunity to deliver a better future for our country, and we still have that opportunity. We've got time on our side. That doesn't take away from the hurt that people are feeling at the moment, and I feel it. But let's think about what we can achieve together.
Can I just say, you've been admirably clear about the mistakes, winter fuel allowance, that you were too gloomy. You and your colleagues were coming in here every week saying how terrible everything was. I think that's very clear. One thing that struck me was that the Prime Minister, when he said this, he said, we were right to level with the public about the scale and depth of the challenges we face. We were right to be gloomy, basically. And he said we didn't do enough to convince them that things will get better. There's something about the way he put that made me think of people in interviews who say, that when they're asked what their biggest weakness is, they say, I was just too perfect. He says, my mistake was that we were just too honest. Why couldn't he just have said what you've just said?
Well, I think he was. I think that's what he was.
I think that's what he was getting at. Saying what you've just said.
I think that's.
And he doesn't say it.
I think that's what he was. The Prime Minister was getting at, which is, it was right that we levelled with the British people about the scale of the challenge. But to the conversation I had with the lady on the doors in Sunderland, she then said, "That's fine, I get that, but what are you doing about it?"
Isn't that part of your problem, that he communicates in this way that doesn't say things in a way that you, literally, in the last 3 minutes, have said? You were clear. Winter fuel allowance, big mistake. We were too miserable. He goes, we were too honest. Isn't that your problem?
I don't think that's quite what he was saying, but what I would say is that
Okay.
Keir is someone who I am proud is leading our country through a very unstable world with all of the volatility and the challenges that we face. He recognises, as we all do, that we need to deliver what we promised to people in 2024, and that right now, what we're doing, we're not making that argument as well as we should. He knows that, and I know that.
All right, look, his first big demonstration that things are going to change is to announce the appointment of Gordon Brown and Harriet Harman as his advisors. Now, I don't want to be rude, and these two individuals are people I've known a long time. They're my friends. They're very serious individuals. But how can I put this? They're both even older than I am. I mean, is this the answer to the problem that you saw on Thursday? I mean, if Harriet and Gordon are the answer, maybe you're asking yourselves the wrong question.
You shouldn't do yourself down there, Trevor, but they are both tremendously talented people, and they're people I've worked with closely in different ways in my time in government and long before, and they've got a lot to offer. But of course, this is one part. This is one part. This is one part of it. We've got the King's speech coming up just next week, and a big and ambitious programme of change for our country.
Would have said was saying yesterday, oh my goodness me, if I had known that they were going to bring in Harriet Harman and Gordon Brown, I would have, I wouldn't have voted for Farage, I would have voted for Keir.
But two of the big challenges we face as a country is violence against women and girls, but also around the cost of living, around the global challenges that we face. And Gordon Brown is someone I've worked with really closely on tackling child poverty, for example. So he's got a lot to offer. Both he and Harriet have got a lot to offer. But this is only one part of what we're seeking to do. We've got a big and ambitious programme we're going to bring forward in the King's speech.
Well, let's talk about what might be in that programme. If I can step through some issues quickly. On Europe, you've had these three red lines: no customs union, no free movement, no single market. Are those three red lines still inviolate?
Well, we definitely need a closer relationship with Europe. It's clear to me that Brexit has caused our country untold damage, has massively hit people in terms of the cost of living and their living standards. And the big cost that we face as a country is that we spent 10 years talking about our relationship with the European Union rather than focusing on things that really matter. It paralysed government and it paralysed our country.
I understand the landscape, but I just asked you what you're going to do. And I asked you if the red lines were still inviolate, and I'm not hearing the word no.
So we hold to what we said in our manifesto, but we do need a closer relationship with Europe. I'm absolutely clear about that. I want young people in Sunderland, across the country, to enjoy all of the benefits that come of being able to work, travel and study in Europe. They've seen their opportunities closed down, their horizons narrowed, and equally businesses have found it really hard to export, to do business. And that's had a big hit on living standards. It's had a big hit on our economy. And we've got to be bold and ambitious in driving forward with closer ties with our European partners.
You're telling me what's wrong, but I understand there's no change there. Immigration. The former Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, says that the actions of Shabana Mahmood on immigration are, quote, un-British. Are you going to persist with her plan to make it more difficult to settle?
So the precise nature of those measures was subject to consultation, but it is right that we take action on immigration. It is also right that we demonstrate to the public that not only can we control the borders, we control who lives in our country. Immigration has always been an important part of our country's story, but it's a necessary precondition for governing. It's a necessary precondition for government that you control your borders and you demonstrate fair. No, we are committed to ensuring that we have fairness and control where it comes to our immigration policy. That is what people expect and it's what we will deliver. But that is not in conflict with our clear and long-standing position that we recognise the benefits of immigration alongside having to make sure that in order to allow for those benefits to be felt, you have to demonstrate to people that you can. You have to demonstrate to people that you can control the system fairly if you want to maintain public confidence.
The only reason I'm trying to interrupt you is that I understand all of that, but I'm asking you a specific question about what's going to change. And thus far, on Europe, on immigration, you're not telling me anything's going to change. On welfare, two-child cap, any change there?
Well, there was definitely a big change, and I'm glad because
Yeah,
we're going to lift 500,000 children out of poverty.
Yeah, but you're not going to resign on that. The point is, Prime Minister's been saying for the last 3 days, I hear you, I get it, we are going to change. I've now asked you about the three of the biggest issues facing the government, and what I'm getting is nothing's going to change.
Look, the wrong message to take from the elections that we've just had would be that people want us to change tack.
I want to know whether when the Prime Minister says he's going to change, what is going to change? Nothing on the big policies is going to change.
Look, part of the frustration that people feel about the state of our country is a failure of government to have a system that works for them. That is what has to change. And a part of that is around immigration. Look,
so what does that mean?
Hang on.
Well, what does it mean? No, you're giving me a lot of words, but what does it mean?
Right, I have always believed that you have to have a system, a fair system, one that recognises the benefits but has clear controls alongside it. That is the system that we are going to deliver. That is not the system that we have at the moment. That's part of the reason that people feel government isn't working for them. It's part of the answer. It's not part of the problem.
Nobody's going to argue it would be good if government worked. You're just not telling me how you're going to make it work.
I just did. So on immigration, you're saying to me, are we going to change approach? This is a change. Because
it's the same approach you had on Wednesday.
It is not a change from what has gone before in the years running up to this. Okay? Where we didn't have control over our borders, where people felt the impact of immigration was too strong, where those numbers changed very, very rapidly. Look, I've always been a supporter and I remain of our diverse country and all of the benefits that come with immigration. But we can only deliver that if we maintain public confidence in that system. What we will not do, however, is move to the divisive approach that we see from the likes of Reform. We, as the Labour Party, are the only party that can bring our country together. We don't want to see that fragmentation. We don't want to pit communities and regions against each other. Yes, but you have
trying very hard to stick to the time that you've given us.
Part of the argument is how you make the case for what you want as well as for the policy. Yes, the policy, but also the argument and the story we tell. And we have not told that story effectively. And we have allowed others, like Reform, to make the case for a negative and backward-looking country, not a country with a hopeful future ahead of us. And that's what we've got to convince people of.
If you're not going to change the policy, can you change the people? Will there be a reshuffle?
I'm not aware that there will be a reshuffle, but those are, of course, matters for the Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister says this morning in one of the newspapers that he is looking forward to a 10-year run. Keir Starmer, Prime Minister for 10 years. Let's not even discuss whether that's realistic. But is that desirable? Was that something you think is a good idea? 10 years?
What Keir was talking about was a decade of national renewal, which is something we've talked about on many occasions previously.
Not necessarily him.
Because the scale of what's in front of us is not going to be fixed in one parliamentary term. We'll go faster. We've got to do more. But some of these challenges are already big and deep and profound, and they have not emerged in the last couple of years. But understandably, voters want to see change faster. So take, for example, the big challenges around educational underperformance across our country.
We've heard that. Look,
that is not going to be fixed overnight, but where we've got a clear plan with more of what I'm announcing today to address those deep-rooted challenges in communities like the North East and in our coastal towns.
Let me just ask you one last question. If he's not going to be here for 10 years, will Keir Starmer lead you into the next general election, and do you want him to lead you into the next general election?
Yes, on both counts.
Bridget Phillipson, thank you so much for your time this morning.